solutions out there that we haven't fully researched that might be out there that are better, kind of a thing. And you don't get those with your plan. If you're going to run an implied counterplan of reform, don't abolish, so there was this case to abolish the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Okay, so our implied counterplan of reforming, don't abolish, we had 6 different things that you could do to reform the IPCC, and they'd probably get up there and be like, well, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and maybe they'd leave one of them, but they'd probably respond to them all. And then we'd get up in our next speech, and we'd respond to them, and we'd say, look, this could fix the problem. But what we did was we tied those 6 specific reforms into their specific harms and advantages that they listed and said, look, you don't have to abolish the agency to get these benefits. You can just reform these specific areas and get those same benefits as well. Does that make sense? A little? Am I not? Okay. And so when they get up and ask, are you running this as a counterplan? You say, no, we're not.
That's simple.
Yeah, that's simple. Say, no, we're not. Yeah, Andrew. Yes, you could respond to it that way. But what they would probably get up there and say is, well, here's 3 reasons why a solution to this problem is going to get passed in the next 5 years or so, kind of a thing. So you would have to have a debate about inherency. But great point there. I really like that. Any other questions on that? Sweet. So let's talk about permutations for a second. I'm assuming you want to take this?
Yes. You have 4 basic forms of permutation. Theoretical issues, and I'll talk about those if you guys want to get into it. The first is the traditional permutation. Permutation it's a mathematical term. You don't need to know that denotation. What it is it's a method of testing is competitive with the affirmative team's case. If you can perm the counterplan, that generally means that both can be done at the same time. Thus, there is no compelling reason to reject the affirmative case. And if there's no compelling reason to reject the affirmative case, the affirmative team should win. The traditional permutation, also called an advocacy, is where you get up and, as the affirmative team in response to a counterplan, so generally in the 2AC, and you say, look, the affirmative and incorporate the negative counterplan into our plan text. And the way you claim the benefits of doing your case, and you claim the advantages of doing the counterplan.
What if your counterplan is non-topical?
You can still do it. Because by running the counterplan, what the negative team has done is they are challenging the value of your problem, the best answer to the problem that you've outlined. So when they run a non-topical counterplan that is not competitive, they are creating an invitation to expand your fiat. And it's easier if you don't think of fiat as coming through the resolution, as coming from the resolution, but think of it as being filtered through the resolution. When the neg runs their counterplan, they are broadening the amount of fiat you have access to. Yeah.
But isn't when the affirmative presents their case in the 1AC, they can't change it after that.
Why?
I would assume they can't change it after that because to modify the case as disadvantages are brought up is unethical because
it's unethical.
That's
a strong opinion.
At least I'll consider that one because then the negative who has brought up disadvantages, they have basically laid waste to the disadvantages because they have changed the case over the course of the rounds to get the judges to vote in their favor, which I consider is...
That's a valid point. I think we should make a vital distinction between unethical, meaning you have broken a moral rule from on high, and unfair.
Unfair.
Meaning you're doing something that's probably abusive in the round. And I think we could actually have a really interesting debate about the legitimacy of intrinsics, which is modifying the affirmative case, but we'll get to that in a second. Is there anyone who disagrees? So you're saying you think permutations are wrong because they require modifying the affirmative case. Okay. You can hold that view. It is not generally accepted because most everyone agrees if your view is accepted, the negative team could get up and run a plan plus counterplan to, let's say, do your case and ban abortion, and they would win every round. So even people who reject intrinsics theory, which says app can modify their case, make an exception in cases of counterplans. Because if you adopt your theory hard and fast, then there is absolutely no way for the affirmative to beat a non-competitive counterplan, especially one that's plan plus. It puts app in a really awkward situation.
So I just have a question just about counterplans in general. I was always thinking, since the negative team, if the negative team is running an untoppable counterplan, then they don't have to affirm the resolution. So technically, they don't have to talk about the actor resolution. Technically, they have unlimited fiat.
Who, the negative team?
Yeah. So if they have unlimited fiat, does that mean they can fiat other countries to do things? So for instance, fiat that Russia reform its human rights as a counterplan to abolishing, putting sanctions on or something like that?
Okay, you raise an excellent point. Oh, I didn't want to get into this, but I guess we kind of have to. All right. In any given resolution, there are two vital terms.
Right.
The actor
Yeah.
and the object. Oh, I get the fancy technology. Alrighty. The actor is the person that the affirmative team, or the entity that the affirmative team gets to use to change policy. Who is the actor in the STOA and NCFCA resolutions this year? U.S. federal government in the STOA and in the NCFCA? The United States, yes. Generally, the actor is going to be a government when you're talking about policy debate. Not always, but generally. The second entity that's important is the object. The object is the entity that the actor is acting upon. For example, U.S. federal government should change its policy towards Russia. Who is the object? What's that? Policy is the object. Policy on whom? On Russia, yes. U.S. should change its policy towards India. Who is the object? Technically, it's policy towards India. De jure, de facto, that is, in fact, it's India itself. So let's say I'm running my human rights case or my sanction India over human trafficking case under an India resolution. And Blake gets up and he runs a counterplan where he fiats India to crack down on human trafficking. Under that scenario, he's fiated the object. What does that leave me in a position to do as affirmative? What has he just done? By fiating the object, by fiating India. Yeah?
He's removed the harms which the actor wishes to solve.
Yes, he has literally fiated my harms away. Traditionally speaking, object fiat is bad. Personally, I've never heard a compelling defense of object fiat. Because anytime you fiat the object, you get into utopia. Big picture. Let's zoom out for a moment. The key standard you use to determine how much fiat you have, generally speaking, is reasonability. Thus, can you fiat the federal government to change its policy towards India, Russia, etc.? Yes. Can you fiat utopia? Can we fiat that the terrorists all over the world will lay down their AK-47s and beat their bombs into plowshares? Generally speaking, no. Why? Because that's irrational. If you allow the fiat of utopia, you destroy policy discourse. In my opinion, if you allow fiating of objects, you also destroy policy discourse. But if you want to run an object counterplan, you can do that. You've just got to come up with some humdingers of good reason why that's appropriate and fair and doesn't absolutely destroy debate. Blake, did you want to defend something along those lines? No. Okay.
I have two quick questions.
Yes.
First question. So are you saying object fiat as in the sense of object fiats away harms? Or, for example, what about a counterplan to unilateral free trade and bilateral free trade? So fiat, a change in policy in both countries.
Okay. Oh, we get into another fiat issue. Oh, you guys. All right. well, postpone question number 2 so we can talk about multi-actor fiat. Multi-actor fiat is where the affirmative or the negative team fiats multiple things do something. Once again, there is no clear consensus on whether or not this is legitimate or not. The 50-state counterplan, which I personally, I'm a huge fan of that counterplan idea, relies on this issue. But the nice thing about 50-state counterplans is there is past precedent, e.g. the Uniform Commercial Code, where all 50 states have acted and adopted the same policy. So I think 50-state counterplans, multi-actor fiat, yes, but justifiable in reality, yes. Fiating that the U.S. proposes a trade agreement and then another country accepts it in some sort of unilateral trade deal or bilateral trade deal, in my opinion, very difficult to justify. If I was AF and you ran a counterplan like that on me, I would run all kinds of multi-actor fiat as bad. I'd say this is not real world. I'd say real policy making has to be made based on what we know and can control. We can't control the other country. Laundry list of standards. Noah.
Okay, so let's say, case, just an example, is making a free trade agreement with X country.
Yeah.
And they run a counterplan that says, no, X country is going to establish a bilateral free trade agreement with the U.S. Now, they don't make a claim that the U.S. is going to sign an agreement. They claim that the affirmative team has already brought up evidence that the U.S. would say yes. So we're only fiating X country, and affirmative team has already proved that the U.S. will say yes to the bilateral free trade agreements.
In that case, they're not multi-actor fiat, they're object fiat. So I'd smack them with that brief. But yes, I mean, I think that's rather doubtful that that would happen because generally the affirmative team is going to fiat that the U.S. sign the agreement, not that they won't read evidence that we would sign it if it did exist. Like,
okay. When it comes to U.S. proposing and another country accepting a free trade agreement, a bilateral free trade agreement, I think like there is kind of the essence of a policymaker versus academic fiat. Like whether or not we're just discussing whether or not it's a good idea or whether we're proposing policy ourselves. And when it comes down to it, I don't see, if you assume an academic fiat mindset, why there's any problem with, let's say you and I are just talking, I'd be like, wouldn't it be great if we had a bilateral free trade agreement with Jordan? And you'd be like, yeah, that would be really cool. But let's say originally you propose, okay, why doesn't the U.S. open up free trade with Jordan? I don't see how that's an unreasonable discussion, especially in light of past precedent.
what past precedent are you referring to?
Where you not with Jordan specifically, I'm just saying where you can have two countries have a bilateral free trade agreement. It's not an impossibility that multi-actor fiat.
Yes.
Real world.
The area where it becomes, I don't think I've taught this to you all yet. There are 3 levels you have to examine when discussing the usefulness of an argument. They are reality, which is what Blake's appeal on here rests, ground, or fairness, and education. All debate theory arguments impact to one of these 3 things. I think if Blake were to run this argument and he were to justify his unilateral free trade counterplan or his bilateral free trade counterplan, he would argue that in reality we could have this discussion and create the fiat, and it's educational to think about what would happen under those circumstances. Where I would appeal is I would contest his reality level, and I'd say, look, it's fine you can have this discussion, but when we're making policy in Washington, D.C., we can't predict what other countries will do. We have to assume that they will marshal their own strength legislatively to pass this free trade agreement or not.